the more you talk, the more follow-up questions I want to ask. I know that you've written a lot about American national identity, especially in the aftermath of the American War in Vietnam. Have you ever noticed times when collective memory of the war in the post-war years has actually, I don't want to say infiltrated, but maybe impacted an interview, and maybe shaped it in some way?
Well, yeah. I mean, I'll pick an example that of a memory that you can find a lot of people, a lot of veterans will tell you that when they returned from Vietnam, they encountered anti-war activists that either called them a baby killer or even spat upon them. When they were either at the airport or recently returned from Vietnam, and this memory has been told so often, and in many cases in a very formulaic way. For example, I was at the airport. I was still in my uniform. This hippie chick came up to me and spat upon me. It's raised the question of how many of these experiences can we rely upon, as accurate. And it's stirred up a lot of controversy, and anger. Many veterans will say, these are not made up urban legends. Other people would say it is largely a myth. This memory that was so pervasive, and maybe still is, that it was a common experience, does suggest that this may be a kind of false, in many ways, false myth of a memory that has been so widely shared that individuals have taken it in as their own experience. And that is, I think as oral historians, that's something very fascinating to be explored. It doesn't really mean that we're in the business of saying, okay, this is true, this is false. We have to say, okay, isn't this interesting that so many people would have very deep feelings about this? So there's something there. What is it that is there that this is pointing to? And the first thing to suggest is that it says that there really was a lot of pain attached with reentry to civilian life and to this country after the experience of Vietnam. So why was there that pain? And it's not a question of sort of pointing fingers at who was the treated the veteran worse, though it does maybe open the door to who else, but besides anti-war activists, might veterans point to as people who betrayed them, and then that opens a larger discussion of the government's behavior, first of all, for lying to the public, including and veterans most especially, about the war, and sending them to fight a war that had been based on false pretext, and put them in really an impossible and I would argue unwinnable situation, and then didn't give them the resources upon homecoming to really adjust as well as they might have. And corporate America shares responsibility too, and an older generation of veterans shares responsibility. And I think veterans themselves, who are really candid about this, will tell you that the war was so traumatic. I understand why people may not have wanted to deal with us. In fact, we kind of often turned inward in silence, or just to each other. We didn't want to deal with anybody who hadn't shared that experience. So there was a real cleavage, between the military and civilian world that has, in some ways, in superficial ways, I think has been healed, but often in ways that may actually have covered up a lot of important history that veterans still have to teach us and to share. And that has to do with really, I think, an understandable desire upon the civilians to in a kind of almost healing and therapeutic way, reassure veterans that they have their support and admiration and respect. And so there was a big movement starting in the 80s to build Vietnam memorials and to kind of more formally welcome veterans home, but at the expense of a deeper scrutiny of the history that they had lived.
No, that's a perfect illustration of what memory theorists claim about oral history, and that oral history tells us less about meaningful facts about the past, but rather the way people understand themselves within this greater context in history. So that's a really great example of that.